Alliance. And today we have a special guest. Allison Ball is joining us on the topic of the state of U.S. immigration. To give you a little background on Allison, she holds a BA from Cornell and an MBA from Wharton and spent her career in marketing and international business. After retiring, Allison volunteered as a troubleshooter for an international microfinance organization and moved to Charlottesville, Virginia in 2003, where she created a company that consulted and taught best practices to nonprofit boards. Currently, Allison volunteers with the Charlottesville International Rescue Committee, giving presentations about refugees throughout Central Virginia. Now spending winters in Green Valley, Arizona, near the Mexican border, Allison has studied U.S. immigration over 4 years and has created this presentation to inform the general public of our U.S. immigration laws, history, and procedures. Currently, Allison is the chair of the AllianceForAction.org Immigration Action Team, which informs others about the border and immigration issues and urges government representatives to correct immigrant injustices and support positive immigration reform. Before I turn it over to Allison, I just want to say that if you have questions, feel free to either put them in the chat box to remember them as Allison's giving her presentation, or we will also have a Q&A session at the very end, so you can save them and ask her directly as well. So without further ado, Allison, thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us today.
Great, thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me speak today. As Alex said, I am a snowbird really to the Green Valley area. Usually this winter, unfortunately, we could not get out to Arizona because of COVID. So I'm actually talking to you from Charlottesville, Virginia right now, but still very involved with several groups out there and issues related to the border. Some of you may have heard me speak before. We started going to the border about 5 years ago, and I really spent the first 2 years trying to understand what was going on with immigration in general, not just what was happening at the border, that too, but also really what were our laws all about? What was our history? How did we get to where we were? And so the first presentation that I put together was just that. It was basic information about the system and how the government worked, etc. This presentation today is really relies on some of that information, which you may or may not already know, but that's okay. We're just going to give you an update. What kinds of things happened during the Trump administration? What are we seeing the Biden administration doing? And where do we think this is all going? I've also included a little bit about what some of the surveys of the American public tell us opinions are like, because in my research, I was surprised by what some of those opinions were. So Alex, will this be recorded and posted somewhere afterwards or not?
Yes, the plan is to upload this onto BCA's YouTube platform.
Great, perfect. Just so people don't feel like they have to really take notes here. So I've got about 17 slides, not too many, and I'll talk for about 45 minutes, and that will leave us about 15 easily for questions, but I'm certainly happy to continue on if other people have questions that don't get answered in that time frame. So that just gives you a feel for how things will unfold here today. And as Alex mentioned, if you have a question, if you can just put it in the chat or save it, we can get to you at the end. I'm having that same. I'm not sure why. There we go. So here's our overview today. We're just going to start with just a sort of backing up to the basics of immigration and what we see our major pathways to citizenship are here in the US. We'll talk about recent changes. Why is immigration important to the country? Some survey data talking about American attitudes, what we see President Biden doing in his first few months in office, and then what can you do if you're interested in getting involved more. So again, just to back up, what we know in a typical year would be pre-COVID and really pre-President Trump. In a typical year for many years, we've taken about 1 million a million new people into the US, and we've created pathways to citizenship for them. And there are really three main ways that this is done. Now, what we're looking at is really three different topics I'll talk about here in a second, but this comes from the 1965 immigration law that outlines about 186 different visa types that we have. About 80 of those are pathways to citizenship, and about 100 of those visas are temporary visas, people who come here to study or to work or just to come here for their vacation. And some of those people would need special visas. But we're not going to talk about those temporary visas. We're going to talk about the 86 different kinds of visas that are pathways to citizenship, and they're collapsed into these three main categories. As you can see, in a typical year, we would take in about 750,000 people who are family-based visas, and they have pathways to citizenship. So they would be vetted overseas, they'd be researched, they'd be studied, etc. They'd put their visa applications in. They would be related to somebody living here, either a citizen or someone with their green card, and they would then come up through the system, because in some of these cases, there are long lines waiting depending on the country you'd be coming from and when you applied. And so about 750,000 people a year come to the US, and they are made citizens on the family-based visa, in one of those family-based visas. There are less number, and you can see employment-based visas. In every year, we only take about 140,000 people. Now, again, these are pathways to citizenship. These are not temporary work visas. These are permanent employment-based visas. These are high-powered PhDs, highly technical skilled people, people with strategic knowledge that we may want to have. And there's even a category if you're coming into the country and you're investing, and you employ at least 10 people, if you're investing at least $1 million in the US and you are hiring at least 10 people, then you can qualify for what's called the EB employment-based 5. That's one of the categories. Note it there, I have a note that says the H-1B is a temporary visa, and it's a skilled visa, mainly computers, but also some medical. And it just so happens in this law, it says that these people, these H-1Bs, can be feeders into the employment-based 2 or employment-based 3. And we have a little backup there. We don't have enough slots in the employment-based visas to allow as many people as qualify for those visas. So we have a little backup in the system, and that's one of the things that we'd love to see President Biden correct during his term. The third category is the humanitarian visa. We only have taken about 130,000 of those people on average every year, and most of those are refugees. Again, these are people who are vetted overseas. They go through medical screening, they go through background checks, they are determined to be refugees by the legal definition of refugees, people who've been persecuted based on their race or religion or some other categories that are embedded in our laws and also in the treaties that we've signed. And during President Trump's time, this number went down and down. The president basically signs an executive order on these refugees, on the number of refugees, and currently that stands at 15,000. The asylum seekers is very similar to the refugees. The qualification legally is the same requirement to be named an asylee, but the asylum seeker is someone who stands on our soil and asks for asylum rather than the refugee, which is vetted overseas. And so these are the people that we're seeing now at the border, coming to the border and asking at our ports of entry for asylum, or even crossing the border between the ports of entry. But again, these are all a sort of a collapsed summary of all the visas that are pathways to citizenship, three major categories based on the 1965 law, which really hasn't changed much. Now, what happened during Trump's term, and this is a long list, but I just wanted to show you exactly the different ways that President Trump was able to change the system without even touching that law. As you know, the law, in order for it to be changed, would need to be voted on by Congress. And we're having a difficult time getting some of our new laws through both the House and the Senate. But despite that, during President Trump's administration, he was able to make different changes to the immigration system that changed it significantly. You have probably heard of the executive orders that he signed. So these are presidential executive orders. As I mentioned on the last slide, he reduced the refugee caps, the numbers of total refugees that would come to this country. It was about 110 during the last year of President Obama's administration, and this was reduced every year to what we currently have, which is 15,000 refugees per year. You probably heard about the travel bans. There were 11 countries that were not allowed to come here either for pathways to citizenship or for visitation visas. There were executive orders related to DACA, which is the deferred arrival for childhood, deferred action for childhood arrivals, which is young people who were brought here by their parents or some other person. They are not citizens. They have no papers here, but they have grown up here. And President Obama signed an executive order that gave those people 2 or 3 years relief to stay here without being deported. And President Trump, during his time, signed an executive order that took away that DACA status, which eventually went to the courts and went to the Supreme Court. And as of yet, no one has determined that DACA should be taken away as a system, and we still have that in the system, but at a quite a precarious position. And President Trump signed 45 COVID-related executive orders that affected immigration. I'm not going to go through each of these categories, but you can see all the different ways Attorney General decisions, policy memos, and internal guidance decisions related to how processes and procedures happened. There is certain discretionary authority that's given to various parts of our government to do things one way or another way. Personnel decisions were made at one point. That number 6 is an interesting one to me. The credible fear interview is the first step in the process if someone comes from, say, Guatemala to a port of entry and asks for asylum. The first step is a credible fear interview, generally conducted by an asylum officer with special training. And one of the personnel decisions that Trump made was to test out whether Customs and Border Protection or the Border Patrol there at the ports of entry could handle those credible fear interviews rather than bringing in an expert asylum officer who had the training. Could we give less training to some other people in order to get more credible fear interviews through the process? Number 7 there, you're probably familiar that some of the defense budget was diverted to build the border wall. And number 8 there, even some international agreements were cut during the Trump era in order to allow asylum seekers to be sent elsewhere to seek asylum rather than staying here in the US. So again, I just wanted to show you the range of decisions that were being made. And this is not by any means a total list of what's happened without even touching that law, which we saw back here. This would be based on the law that we have and the visas we offer. A lot of changes were made throughout the system. There were also a lot of COVID-related immigration changes, and you can see the 3 areas of our laws, the family, the employment visas, and the humanitarian visas, changes that were made there to reduce the numbers of people coming in. We had some family visas suspended. We had some reductions in temporary work visas. We had refugee entry suspended for a certain period of time. We had and still continue to have what's called rapid expulsion at the border based on the CDC Title 42. We'll talk about that later. For a while, all the immigration courts were closed. In some instances, we only heard in the courts the cases that pertain to those people who are in detention. And so most of the immigration courts, say here in Arlington, Virginia, were closed for a long period of time. USCIS offices were closed. These are the people that process all the visas. So all the temporary work visas, the DACA status extensions or renewals that people might have had, temporary protected status, student visas, all these things pretty much came to a halt during COVID. And of course, as you know, the non-essential travel at the borders, both with Mexico and Canada, were suspended based on COVID. So what was the result of all this? And this is really the most interesting chart, I think, from my perspective and statement of what's occurred. What this chart shows is in 2016, the numbers of people that were brought into the country for permanent pathways to citizenship. In 2016, the blue column is 2016, and then what we expect 2021, this year, to look like based on those changes. And you can see, if you go to the far right there, the total 2016 is, and this is in thousands. So this is 1.2 million came in 2016, but projected 600,000 would be coming in this year, making new citizens. And the question that I asked myself as I looked at this, why is this important, and why should I care whether 1.2 million come into the country or 600,000? Is this a big deal, and how might it affect me going forward? So that was kind of the question that I asked myself. And I think this is the answer that I came up with. Why is immigration important to us? And I really think it's for three reasons. So the first has to do with the fact that we are a nation of immigrants and that we're talking about human beings. We're talking about people and people's lives, and the changes that we are making with our immigration system are either allowing people to be together with their families or separated from their families, based on the fact that most of the immigrants that we're taking into the country are based on family visas. We'll talk more thoroughly about what do immigrants mean to the US economy, and what immigrants mean to the US as far as our world leadership, and the fact that we would like to see successful diversity in our country, as it seems to be making us strong. And I'll cite some of the literature that talks about that. So the first point of why the US economy depends on immigrants is based on a number of factors. The economic studies that I have read say that 2% of our growth every year assumes 1 million new people, 1 million new immigrants are coming here every year. And so the main drivers of our growth in our economy, one of the main ones here is these new workers coming into the economy and participating. So if we are short of the 1 million, we are going to immediately not see the growth in our economy that we would like to see. The second contribution that we know that immigrants make is that new companies are being started by these immigrants, and they're providing employment not only for other new immigrants, but also for the native born. And we know statistically that 44% of the Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants or their children. So much as I don't like to admit it, it is true, and statistics show that these immigrants who are coming are more creative by and large than the native born are. And so this is going to also help our economy grow with these new companies. The other thing I wanted to mention at this point is that international students have always been a very important part of our economy and also feeding the US economy. We know in 2020 that in the fall semester, new student visas, international student visas, were down 43%. And this is a problem because typically the international students come here with student visas, and then they have another kind of visa that bridges their from this being a student into either getting a temporary work visa or one of these work visas that are pathways to citizenship. And if we are not continuing to entice international students here, we're going to have problems on the back end when we look to those people for the growth that we'd like to see. So it's just something that I've been watching in my studies. What's happening to those students, and will those applications pop up next year? We hope the answer is yes. The other interesting thing in all of this is during COVID, what we've uncovered is a significant portion of our economy and is based on the work of immigrants. We've now come to realize that immigrants work predominantly in the service industries, and these are the job enabling jobs. So these are the people that are the nannies in our home. They're they're doing the home health care workers. They're cleaning. They're working in the nursing homes. All those functions in our homes that would have enabled us to go out to work if we weren't retired, these predominantly are handled by immigrants. Also, we know there are many immigrants who have medical training and language training, but because the US licensing of these folks, of doctors and nurses and therapists, is they haven't hit those, they haven't been able to pass the tests or hit the hurdles of the licensing here in the States. They have nursing degrees or medical degrees from overseas, but we've not been able to tap into those at a point in time when we would very dearly love to have them help out with the COVID crisis. But I think the most important thing on this page, or the most significant thing from my perspective, is that we know 5 million of the COVID frontline workers are unauthorized, meaning that they're here without the proper papers, or some would say they're here illegally. And so of the 11 million people who are here without the proper authorization, 7 million of those people work. And of those 7 million workers, 5 million are COVID frontline workers. They're the people who are picking the crops, they're processing the food, they're in food services, or they're in home or child or elder care jobs. And so they're keeping the economy running. They're sort of the infrastructure based upon which all the others of us are enabled to work. And so people, even in Department of Homeland Security report, these are deemed essential for our economy. One of the changes that is being discussed in Congress right now is allowing these frontline workers to have pathways to citizenship, something that's very hotly debated, but it's something that has been put forth as a possibility. We also know that 300,000 of the DACA recipients, that's almost half of the DACA recipients, are frontline healthcare workers, and they're all working during the COVID crisis to keep things safe for the rest of us. So it's just an interesting thing that we've uncovered.
Hello, everyone. Looks like we're experiencing a little bit of technical difficulties on Allison's end there. Looks like she just logged off. I'll see if she comes back in. But if you have any questions, you can feel free to write those in right now into the chat. Oh, there she is. Here she comes back. Allison, you're on mute. You're still on mute, Allison.
Yeah, okay, how's that?
Perfect.
Sorry about that, I got knocked right off internet. Okay, I apologize. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna keep going.
Okay.
Humanitarian aid.
Can you share your screen again, please?
I'm sorry, what?
Can you share your screen again, please?
Sure. How's that? Good, okay. So here we are talking about world leadership and national security, and that I've read reports recently that basically look at this humanitarian aid and the need for us to be in the discussions with the United Nations, with the other countries about people who are moving around the world, the people who are being displaced from Syria, who are moving into Europe and to the rest of the Middle East. If we're not at the table talking with those folks about solutions for these displaced persons, we're not going to be in a position to have strong national security, because there are security risks associated with large numbers of people moving around the world who are displaced. Also, we know from a diplomacy perspective, we need to understand cultural differences and be able to deal with those appropriately. Articles I've read recently say that the military also is recognizing that they need to cultivate diverse teams and that they need to be fully integrated in order to be military ready. And we know from studies also that both business and government with diverse workforces those teams find better solutions, and they're able to help us maintain our competitiveness globally. So again, from just a personal perspective, immigration appears to be something we should value, and it's part of our culture and our history. We need, for economic purposes and benefits, we need to continue to take in immigrants, because we know that the birth rates in the US are not keeping up as we need it to in order to keep the economy growing. And from a security and leadership perspective, we also know that diversity and immigrants are helpful in that area as well. So I wanted to just take a moment and just show you some of the research about some survey data. I know that I was very surprised when I saw this data about what people in the US are thinking about different aspects of immigration. I literally had to write the question in here. So the first one from the Pew Research Center from 2019 says 62% agree that people from all over the world are essential to who we are as a nation. So even though 62% of us agree, you can see a big difference between Republicans and Democrats as they answer this question. And then the flip is that second one there. A third of us think if America is too open to people from all over the world, we risk losing our identity. And again, you can see a big difference between Republicans who responded to that question and Democrats. But this one surprised me. 73% say that admitting refugees escaping war and violence is a very or somewhat important goal. And so this underscores the fact that 73% of the American public feel like we should be taking those refugees into our country. The last one there, 77% understand that undocumented immigrants mostly fill jobs that US citizens do not want. And the studies bear this out to be true, that a lot of the people who are here without the proper papers are taking jobs that without them, the Americans would not be taking. People that were American citizens are not interested in backbreaking work, either harvesting crops or the backbreaking work of some of these meat plants that are around the country. And these are predominantly where the undocumented immigrants are being hired. One more from the Pew Research Center in 2019, 67% agree that it is very or somewhat important to establish a way for most immigrants in the country illegally to remain here legally. Now, this is an interesting one to me. I was on a Zoom recently where the Pew Research Center was talking about this question, and they said that the response to this question really hadn't changed very much over time, that this was a very consistent response, that almost 2/3 of us say that it's very or somewhat important to allow the folks who are here in this country illegally to remain here legally. This does not say that they need to have a pathway to citizenship. It just says that they should remain here legally. And there's a big difference I've noticed in the literature between attitudes of people who are already here in the country, the 11 million who already are living here, and those who are still coming or yet to come. There's a big difference in attitude about whether they should be allowed to come. So it's just an interesting statistic that I found. These last two are from a different survey. The 33% say immigration is a critical issue. That was from a 2020 poll, and that was down from 49%. I think during 2020, what we found was COVID eclipsed the immigration issue in its importance. And so we see that, again, the general public does not necessarily think that immigration is a high enough priority. Things like COVID, healthcare, the economy, these take a front seat now, and immigration may be taking a back seat. And that last one, 42% say immigrants have a higher crime rate than Americans. And I wanted to just take a moment and show you on this next chart that is absolutely not true, that immigrants have a higher crime rate than Americans. Every study that I've seen shows just the opposite. In this particular study is interesting to me. What it's looking at is of all the crime rates in Texas from 2012 to 2018, this shows a rate per 100,000. So it compares really like for like, and it looks at US born citizens and compares those to legal immigrants, meaning those who've come on with those pathways to citizenship, those first three categories we named, and then compares that in the green to those that are undocumented. And with the exception of traffic violations on the far right, every other case shows that the highest crime rate is at the rate per 100,000 is always highest among US born citizens. And then next is legal immigrants. And then the lowest rate is always those who are undocumented. So I just wanted to show that statistic because it is one of the few studies I've ever seen that show the comparison of the US citizen to the legal immigrant to the unauthorized or undocumented. But it just disproves what 42% of Americans know or think, and also often what the rhetoric you hear is that people coming into our country maybe have a higher crime rate, but in fact they don't. So what has Biden been doing? He really came out of the gate with some very exciting things. He signed a lot of executive orders early on in his term. He reversed a lot of the things that Trump had done, and you'll see some of those items we've talked about before: refugee caps, travel bans, MPP is Migrant Protection Protocol. And as you know, down there at the border, what that means is some people came and asked for asylum at our ports of entry. They were asked to go and wait in Mexico. About 70,000 people were asked to wait in Mexico for their asylum hearings at courts in El Paso or other places near the border. And slowly at this point, Biden has agreed that in 3 ports of entry, some of those people will start to trickle back into the states, which is, I think, a good change. The border wall investment stop, and any executive order that said DACA should not continue was reversed by Biden's early executive orders. The other thing he put together were task forces on new families. I think he understood the need to incorporate and to resettle properly and integrate new Americans into the culture here as quickly and as effectively as possible. He's put together a task force on family reunification. Some of you may be familiar that with the family separation issue, there are still about 600 children that have been not reunited with their families. He has put together a task force to keep working on that issue and to consider all manner of solutions to the problem. In fact, some of the children are here in the US, some of the parents are in Guatemala or Honduras and El Salvador, and what's the solution going to be there? And he's also put together a task force on root causes and working to collaborate with not only the non-governmental operations and the non-governmental organizations in Central America and Mexico, but the governments in order to change the economies and the security of those countries in order to prevent people from needing to come here in the first place. He also came out of the gate at the Department of Homeland Security level to announce pauses in enforcement and deportation. Some of those were caught up in the courts and didn't go through quite as effectively as he'd hoped, but he did start out trying to just put a pause on things so he could try to get a handle on what was happening, which was great. He also came out from the White House and he encouraged a new law that would replace that 1965 law. Pretty much nothing has changed since 1965. So this sort of comprehensive immigration reform looks like this. I've just written sort of the top level issues that were included in that. And since the time that Biden came out with it, it was introduced in both the House and Senate. We'll see that on the next page. But you can see how the family situation would be altered and updated, how the employment-based visas would be altered and updated, including getting rid of that backlog that I mentioned, how looking at underlying causes of Central America migration, giving money, large amounts of money for that, looking at pathways to citizenship for many of those who are undocumented, including the Dreamers or the DACA folks. The temporary protected status is about 300,000 folks who've come here in the last 10 to 15 to 20 years from places with earthquakes and also different wars. Yemen is one of the countries where we have taken some folks, and also looking at pathways to citizenship for the migrant farm workers who, as I mentioned on the previous page, have been deemed really essential to our economy and to our lifestyle, and have really been raised in status in the eyes of the American public who are seeing how important they are. He's encouraging increasing technologies at the ports of entry and also along the border, and improvements to the court. So again, this is right out of the gate. He came out with a lot of changes, and this is what it looked like. Now, what's happened since then? Bills were introduced, as I said, similar to the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2020. It was introduced in the Senate as well as in the House. Also, the Senate introduced once again the DREAM Act. This has been introduced before, and that goes after those deferred action for childhood arrivals, folks who came here as children and who have not become citizens, but they have applied for this DACA status, which allows them 2 years at a time to not be deported, but to be able to get work permits and driving permits in some states where they couldn't without citizenship. In addition to that, 2 out of the 10, there were about 10 different immigration bills that had been passed in 2019 that had to be repassed in the House. So 2 significant bills, these are not all of them, but the 2 significant bills that we're watching closely that were passed already in the House, and they're waiting to be introduced in the Senate, are the American Dream and Promise Act, which applies to not only the DACA folks, but also the temporary protected status. So you can see, and the one above, the DREAM Act in the Senate, is a narrower bill that just has to do with the DACA recipients. The American Dream and Promise Act that was passed in the House applies to a much broader group. It's more like 1 million people who have the DACA and TPS status, and that was passed in the House and is now waiting to be introduced in the Senate. And the same with that Farm Workforce and Modernization Act. What this does is it increases the wages and allows for some pathways to citizenship among the farm workers. And that was passed, as I said, in 2019 as well as 2020 now. So those second two are waiting in the Senate to be introduced. So what's happening with refugees? We just got some news today that President Biden, while he promised to increase the number of refugees, remember, those are the folks that are vetted overseas and maybe living in refugee camps or living on the economy, they're waiting to come here. And that's the executive order that he could have signed, saying we're going to raise that number up. He has just announced that he's going to leave that number at 15,000 per year, which is the low that Trump put us on. And it's not clear to me yet. I haven't read enough to understand exactly what his rationale was for doing that. There is a budget component of this. Most of the resettlement monies come from the federal government, and they're funneled down through the states, and there may be some budgetary concerns or other concerns. I haven't read enough to know what his rationale is, but that's a disappointment for some of those people who are watching what's happening. So this is really our last slide, and it really has to do with what could you do if you're interested in this topic. As I mentioned, one of the things, as somebody who follows immigration and is concerned about the issue, it's always interesting to see, well, how important is this issue to the rest of the country, to the rest of the Americans? And so if the surveys say only 1/3 of the folks are interested in this, it just means we have to really speak more loudly if we want our voices to be heard. There are two really, really good newsletters coming out of Washington, and I've listed them here. If you're interested in staying current on immigration, I would suggest that you write to those two or go to those websites and sign up for their, sometimes they're daily, some of them are weekly, but those are two strong organizations in Washington. Of course, there's any number of places you can donate money or in-kind items, both locally as well as nationally. There's a way to become active in terms of influencing your government or focusing the attention of other people on this issue. I use this democracy.io. If you go to democracy.io, you can put your address in and you can write to your congressperson and your 2 senators. And I have made it a goal for myself to send one email to all 3 of those people about one topic once a week. Just a short email. I'd like you to support whatever. So my latest, of course, was I would like you to urge President Biden to support an increase in the number of refugees coming from overseas and why this is important. Just a short and sweet note. So there's ways to get involved at that level, or writing letters to the editor, or standing on the corner. That should say corner, not cornet. And of course, there are all manner of places where you can volunteer. And at the very bottom of that, I've just listed a few organizations that are currently out there in Southern Arizona that are particularly in need of volunteers and in some cases money to support what they're doing. The Border Community Alliance does work, and I'll let Alex just say a word or two in a minute about how the Border Community Alliance uses some of their funding to support some of the really great activities going on in northern Mexico. Casa Alitas is a shelter run by Catholic Charities in Tucson, and they take, I don't know the exact numbers at the moment, but they probably take 200 or 300 different asylum seekers coming into the country every week, going through their shelter, and they're sort of staged there. They come in, they're COVID tested, they spend the night, they're separated if they have COVID, they're matched up with their sponsors, and these are the people who've agreed throughout the country to take these people in and financially support them until they can have their court hearings in the immigration courts throughout the country. Green Valley Samaritans does work, and you can go to their website and donate money to help with the refugees who are coming in now. There are people going down into Mexico, where there are a lot of people now in the Nogales area who are waiting to come into the country, and they've been stuck in shelters, some for over a year. And then Kino Border Initiatives is a great organization. They actually run a shelter in Nogales and do a lot of work with the migrants coming north. So why don't I stop my screen share, and do you want to maybe just say a word, Alex, about some of the great work that Border Community Alliance is doing in northern Mexico, and then we can open up to questions.
Sure. Well, thank you first and foremost for that outstanding presentation. So clear and concise and really wonderful. So thank you for
Thank you.
Allison. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to just mention something that is really important about Border Community Alliance that, you know, sometimes it's not quite clear, and it's our Mexico pass-through program. And we're actually privileged to have our partner director on this call, Alma Cotidianas. It's through this partnership, that's the A in BCA, the Border Community Alliance, that we're able to pass through funds to NGOs in Mexico. So you can actually make tax-deductible donations, what we like to call social investments, to really support and strengthen these civil society initiatives. And first and foremost, I would say if your interest is immigration, that you should support the San Juan Bosco shelter in Nogales. So a lot of people want to help asylum seekers and asylum youth. Well, that shelter hasn't closed for a single day in nearly 4 decades, and even through the pandemic. And so, yeah, I want to invite you to visit our website, bordercommunityalliance.org/donate, and I'll put it in the chat. And that's where you can make your designated donation to all of those different projects across the line that are vetted by Alma's organization, the Community Foundation for Nogales, Sonora, which is called FESA. Alma, would you like to say something?
Oh, thank you, Alex. It was a wonderful presentation. We learn so much every day. You have to keep all your eyes and ears open because every 24 hours, everything changes. So just let me update you here, and I will let Alex know. I'm participating in a seminar from UCLA and different actors every month. This morning was amazing. It was a Mexican consul in Chicago and a professor from San Diego, et cetera, et cetera. But the most outstanding part, one of the presenters said, you haven't seen anything yet. Once the new infrastructure program from Biden is approved, there will be hundreds of undocumented people, if not thousands, ready to work. They already have their network. They already know where they're going to hire. And nothing has been published. They already know. They already know where they're going to start working. Every time there is a natural disaster, Houston, Louisiana, Katrina, you name it, you know, hundreds of people come to work. So let's keep our eyes open regarding this, because this is just what we learned this morning, for just for you to share. And regarding the pass-throughs, we just started a brand new project with BCA and the Sonora Migrant Project, where is, you might know her, Sister Judy, Susie Sanders, Shauna. They're providing a $1,500 fund to be split in half for the Red Cross Station, where they are providing a bar of granola and a bottle of water to every single deported people. Yesterday we had, during the night shift, 140 people, 100 adults and 40 kids. Most of them slept at the San Juan Bosco shelter. And the other half,
were they deported at night there in Nogales?
Any time of the day. Last Thursday, we made a visit, and one of the police women told Susie that they were not taking anyone to the shelter during the day because it was closed. Susie has been there every Thursday since February. She knows it's open. People are allowed to stay now at least 15 days. most of the men who come by themselves, they will not even wait for coffee in the morning. They just have something up ready, trying to cross again. Those with children and pregnant women, etc., are the ones who are staying longer. And this $750 per month will help to provide for the basics: toilet paper, pay for gas, so people can, they can be fed and they can take a hot, warm shower. A little bit of food here and there. So that's how things are being faced on the Mexican side of the border. It's all about civil society and this kind of projects that BCA and FESAC are supporting. There's nothing regarding public funding, KBI or anyone else.
All right, good, thank you.
Awesome, thank you very much, Alma. Yeah, that's a great example of that Nogales migrant project of people, civil society in the U.S. wanting to really make a positive change for migrants and asylum seekers over there in Nogales. And all of you here on this call can be like that as well through that pass-through program that we have, that really unique pass-through program. So we've got a few questions here in the Q&A. The first question here comes from Michael Drake. Allison, to create the political will to enact reform, do we first have to establish control of the border, that is, limit illegal entry?
Yeah, I think this is a good question, and I think this is what gets debated a lot in and is being debated now. I mean, these bills that are being introduced in the Senate are stalling because we don't seem to have the border under control. And by the border, I don't just mean the border itself. I mean this whole process, right? That we have Title 42. We're expelling people rapidly at the border. We're not expelling children. This was a significant change by the Biden administration to not expel unaccompanied minors. And so then the children built up, and the process for a child is to be held first by Customs and Border Protection, and then eventually moved into Health and Human Services. The law says within 72 hours. They weren't able to have enough spaces because of COVID in the Health and Human Service shelters, so they weren't moving them on. So this whole system right now is not working well. And I don't disagree that we have to establish control of the border. One of the fallacies I see about the border is because we don't have enough capacity to talk to people at the ports of entry, we're basically suggesting that people go around and come through the desert in Arizona or across the river if it's Texas. And so I think, in my opinion, one of the solutions to the situation is to have more capacity at the ports of entry to talk to people so that they're not going through the desert, which is always, always crossing the port of, between the ports of entries is an illegal act in this country. We have a law that says if you cross the desert between the ports of entry, it is either a misdemeanor the first time or a felony the second time and the time thereafter. But sadly, because we have Title 42, so let's say you're a single male and you've crossed between the ports of entry and you're picked up. Right now with Title 42, you're returned back across the border, and as Alma just said, these people are turning right around and going back across the border. So we don't have a handle on things. And the other thing that I like to remind people is the people are going to keep coming because of the situation in their homes. And so until we really grapple, and that's one of the things I think is very positive about what Biden is trying to do, although it's going to take some time, the root causes of why people are migrating, unless those can change, we're going to just keep having people come. So I don't disagree at all. I think, yes, we need to get things under control at the border, and they're not at this time. So thanks for that question.
So if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask Allison directly or Alma as well, feel free. Lisa Bachman mentions the Hope for Humanity, so she's got the information there that on the chat. So feel free to access that information. Susie Clark says, "Thank you for an informative talk." Nancy from London, fantastic talk, Allison. Thanks so much. Greetings to London.
Yeah.
Alma, Nancy's the one that donated the tablet for the youth at De Juven. So so I told her the story. You're on mute right now, but I told her the story. And you have the BCA/donate link there that I've provided if you're interested in making designated donations to the San Juan Bosco shelter and KBI or others. Nancy says, "Thank you, Alma." Phyllis says, "As always, a very informative and interesting presentation by Allison Ball. You are wonderful. You never disappoint. Thank you very much for all you do." Here on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alma. Thank you, Allison. I've learned so much. Your presentations have given me ways to act and feel as if I'm making a difference.
Thank you. Alma, did you have a question?
Yes, I just want to add something to the iPad program, Nancy. This is a program that started after 18 years. So Patient is my second name. We started it 18 years ago, trying to figure out how to have a collaboration with the Secretary of Education so the children at the Migrant Center can have a report card at the end when they move. If they go back to Guatemala, go back to Chiapas, stay here, move into the US, you cannot take away that education. So finally it happened last year, as some of you know, and federal government, our own president, ended up the program December 31st. So we had 2 young teachers right out of college who were out of paycheck starting January 1st. So we raised a campaign. We funded the iPads and Nancy sent a tablet from England full of the Queen's stamps on the envelope. We kept the envelope. We're going to frame it, and we have the iPads and everything. And now we are paying for one of the teacher's salary, and the other, the group at the shelter, Casa de la Misericordia, they are paying for the other teachers. So here we created 2 jobs. Yes, we are supporting the children. Yes, we have a formal education program. It's a multi-grade school. In one of the rooms is the little ones, and on the other one is the bigger ones. We have 12 years old in first grade from Guatemala. They have never even had a pencil. They are reading now. The 5 years old are reading. So this is social investment, providing education, providing the tools, and paying for the teachers. So we are now securing, just for you to know, we are now securing the second program here, which is going to be June, July, and August. We have already secured 1 teacher, and let me tell you where that money came from. It's a stimulus check from a guy in San Francisco who sent us his $1,400 check, and it's going to get through BCA to pay for one of the teachers for 3 months. So this is just some food for thought. We're going to work in batches of 3 months. We want to tell the teachers that we have enough money to pay them for the next 3 months. We want them to be part of this. They are loving the program. The children want their teachers to come during the weekend. And the teachers go like, I have laundry to do, I have a baby. The teachers, the children finally have some structure for the first time in 2 years. But let me tell you something, and this might be the cherry of the cake, the ice of the cake. They are the only children in Nogales that are attending school with other 40 children. They are the only ones in social networking. Everyone else is at school, at home. So these children waiting for asylum are the only ones in a school. Can you believe it?
That's great. Michael, did you have a question?
Yes, Allison, thank you. I asked the question about the controlling the border before to create the political will for reform. I think it's going to be very difficult to get particularly Republicans in the Senate to vote for reform if they see the clamor at the border and all these big statistics about undocumented folks and asylum seekers and so forth. These are different times. My first job as an attorney here in Tucson was assistant U.S. attorney, federal prosecutor. And a good number of our cases were immigration cases that arose at the border. And then later I practiced law on the border in Nogales. and served as a U.S. magistrate and conducted a lot of initial appearances and search warrants on immigration-related cases. But the climate today and the numbers today are so much greater, and the concern is so much higher, and the tragedy is so much greater for these folks also. And I just don't see any reform happening until those numbers go down. The undocumented entrants and dealing with the folks that we have now in shelters. I don't see any movement in Congress, particularly the Senate.
I agree with you. I agree that the political will is not as strong as I thought it was, even when Biden was first elected. We were hearing that there were a lot of people in the Senate who would be supportive of some of these pathways. And even now, I think Lindsey Graham is backtracking, and he introduced that one bill for the DACA recipients. I don't disagree at all that, sadly, I think, and I'm relatively new to the politics of this whole thing, but I think it's always been, we want greater border security for any relief on the citizenship side. And I'm not sure that the two are always related, but the perception that they're related is definitely there. And what I do know is that the surveys show, again, the American public is probably more favorably disposed to those who are already living here than the Senate is. And they're also more favorably disposed to those who are already here, living in their communities, working, et cetera, than they are to the new people who appear to be just arriving or returning or whatever. So I think it's a very complicated issue and not well understood. And I think you're right that I mean, as time goes on, I get more and more discouraged about seeing any significant reform, including those changes that have been introduced in the Senate and are waiting to be introduced. And that's, I think that massive immigration reform is just a pipe dream that won't go anywhere.
And the unfortunate part is there are some politicians who use the situation to inflame attitudes and they see political advantage to them to demonize the entrance to and Trump was, he was front and center, and we've got a lot of senators, or a good deal, a good number of senators these days who are doing much the same thing. So yeah, it's very discouraging.
Right. Yeah, I agree. As far as if we're looking for reform, I was hopeful at the election time, and I'm less hopeful now. And this change about the refugees is quite significant in my mind, because it says Biden is not willing to take on the fight. He's not willing to, and even though these are very separate issues, refugees have nothing to do with asylum seekers at the southern border. And it's a completely different group of people who process them and resettle them and get them moving it through our country. But I don't know what's happened here, why he's gone back on this campaign promise. I haven't read enough to know the rationale, but I will be looking into it, because it's not a good indicator that he would run on this issue of 125,000 refugees and then say, I'm not doing this now, when he came out of the gate so strongly. So I'm with you as far as being discouraged about changes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the presentation.
Yes.
Very good.
Thank you. I know a lot of you do live at the border, and because I go back and forth from Virginia to the border, I know what people in Virginia know about the border, and it's basically nothing. They know what they hear, and they wonder if we're in danger being so close to the border. And, you know, we have to explain, no, this is a very safe place. We're not in any danger at all. And by and large, the people who are coming across the border this is not like these are the drug dealers. These are not people who are making that part of the country unsafe. But it's most people who aren't at the border don't really understand what's happening there. Somebody had a question about Nogales. Is this in Nogales, Mexico? What?
The
I was
shelter.
wondering about the San Bosco place where the kids were learning and the.
Good question. Yes, it's over in Nogales in Sonora, which is in Mexico, right across the border here. Yeah. It seems we, the US, is behind on processing, need money for that, not walls or technology. By technology, I mean sensors, right? To me, the capacity at the ports of entry, more capacity there because we don't want to funnel people out. What we're doing now is we're saying we have no capacity to talk to you at the port of entry. So people are waiting. They're getting tired of waiting. They're going around the borders. This is just a formula for problems. So one of the things we're urging is that the government put more capacity at the ports of entry to process these people. Any other questions? We're just a little after 3 o'clock out there. And if anybody wants to drop off, that's fine. If somebody has other questions, I'm happy to keep chatting here, whatever anybody wants to do.
I'm just gonna drop a link really quick here in the chat. We had a reporter from ABC News come about a week or two ago. With Alma and I brought them over to the San Juan Bosco shelter, and so you have the article and you have the video, so you can see what it's like, a kind of a slice of life in a day in the San Juan Bosco shelter, and really the selfless family that has day in and day out served migrants after their regular 9-to-5 jobs. That's what they do. So if you're interested in seeing what the latest conditions are like in the San Bosco migrant shelter of Nogales, go ahead and click that link and you'll pull up the story in the video as well.
Good, thanks. That's good to have that information about the shelter. That's great. Anything else today? Any other questions or comments?
Yes, I have a question. This is Marty and my wife Janelle. We're down in Tubac. And I guess my question is basically, you hear the rumble of open borders all the time, the borders are open, everything's coming. What actually is going on as far as when people, are passing the stories that the border is open and people are rushing in? What's the true situation?
The border is open in this manner. We got trucks coming through the border that haven't stopped, right? We've got goods and services and vegetables and fruits coming through Nogales just like normal. So that part of the border is open. We also have people still crossing the border for work. So if you live at the border in the Arizona side and you have to go to work in Mexico and vice versa, there are people going back and forth for those purposes. So from that perspective, the border is open. I think there was one of the senators, I think, or congressman from Oklahoma. Are you referring to that video that went kind of viral that talked about, he said that the people are just coming north and here they are and they're going through the border. I don't think what he showed was correct, and I don't think his language was correct, because most people, the children, the unaccompanied minors, are not being turned back because of Title 42, but other people from Mexico, Central America, they're all being turned back, and what we call it is rapid expulsion. They might have come across not at the port of entry, but between the ports of entry, they're going to be brought right back across the border within sometimes an hour or 2 hours. I know for a while, people were being deported in the middle of the night into Nogales and other places. So there isn't such a thing as an open border right now. It is not open. And that's because we have this Title 42. And even if that were lifted, it would mean we would be processing people through the ports of entry, which we aren't. And that's a huge debate, is should we be opening up these people? Should we be opening the ports of entry and taking asylum seekers in? We're not taking asylum seekers as we normally would without Title 42. We're not hearing their story and deciding that they can come in. Some of the people are coming in. We're seeing the people who are coming into the shelter at Casa Alitas are folks from Cuba, folks from Venezuela, folks from Brazil who are coming up through Mexico. They're asking us for asylum, and they are being allowed to come in even without Title 42. They're not being expelled, but they're coming in. They're immediately COVID tested. They're brought into the shelter. They are quarantined if they have a COVID positive test, and then they're going on to their asylum. So I don't think we can say that the borders are open like we're just letting people in, we're letting people in. It's definitely not happening.
Well, thank you very much, because I'm from Wyoming, is where my home is, and a couple of senators and congressmen, well, actually are my two senators. I use the website to contact them all the time, and they are the ones that are constantly in the papers in Wyoming telling how the borders are open and people are just rushing in. And so I appreciate your input there, because I'll be sure to, I love to send them letters.
Oh, good.
When they don't know what they're talking about.
Right. I think there was recently, and Langford, I think is his name, from Oklahoma. And I'm sorry, I don't know if it's a senator or a congressman, but he stood and took a video and said, I'm under a bridge here in Texas, and people are just walking up and they're waiting, and this is the border, and they're going to just all be let in. And I thought, this is just not true. This just can't be true. He didn't say he was going to confirm that with anybody, or he didn't confirm it. That was just his rhetoric. And I think, again, it's a difference between what's going on at the border and what people think is going on, or what they know is going on. And I think there is a big difference. And I do think politically it's being used erroneously to say what's happening when it really isn't. And I've got a statement that we put out from the Alliance for Action. If you care to put your email in the chat, I could send you one of these statements directly about here's what the situation is at the border and what we think should happen. And I don't know if that would help you write your letters or not, but I'm happy to do that.
That will be fine, and I will do that. I just want to say, as my senator was one of the ones down there claiming that he was on the border watching people come across. So anyway, I appreciate that, and I will send you my email. Thank you.
Okay, thank you
for the presentation.
Sure, thank you for coming. Thanks. I think it's confusing to know what's happening. And I think it's easy to forget we got truck drivers coming in who maybe have COVID, but they're not being tested. But it helps our economy stay. Yes, Alma.
Yes, I just want to add to what Janelle's husband was saying. No, you don't have your name there. Remember the day prior to the midterm elections during the Trump administration, there was this huge issue about the hundreds of thousands of people coming from the caravans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we always have to read between lines and see on both sides. It all comes at a perfect political time, both for you and for us.
Nancy from London, did you have a question or were you just, no, okay. Okay, I'm picking up now in the chat from joy@gmail.com and H4H Spring Forest. I'll send 2 of the write-ups to that. Those are just our southern border talking points. Again, it's a perspective that maybe will help you in your writing. And then I can send something to you also, McGuffey m@res.net. Sure. Good. Good. I've got 3 now. Lisa Buchanan, Joy Perry. Oh, Pepper Wolf. Okay. I got, these are all coming in, so I'm just going to copy them down. That's JV and CYA. Any other questions or comments? Sorry, I had to.
I think that's it.
Okay.
I want to say thanks again to you, Allison. Again, outstanding presentation, and I mean the reception from everyone. I think the feeling's mutual, and thank you all too for joining us today from all the points all over the world that you are at. I really appreciate the solidarity and the support. So nice seeing some familiar faces too as well. All right.
Yeah, and if I send you these things and you want, is there a way for you to send it to the whole group, Alex? If I sent it to you, maybe that would be
easier.
I'll
Yeah.
send it to you,
Okay.
and if you forward that, then you'll have my email. And I'm serious, if you have a question or a week from now you think, hey, I wonder about this, just send me an email. I'm on email a lot, and I'm studying this almost like a full-time job to stay current. And I'm happy to send you whatever I know, or an article, or some information. Or there are certainly a lot of people working on this, far smarter than I am. And there are studies and research that I look at. But I'll send the write-up to Alex, and maybe he can send it to everybody who signed up for this, just as a follow-up.
Yeah, I'll stand by for that. Send out that email to everyone. Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks
Good.
again.
Thank you. Have a
great
good
afternoon.
evening. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.